This time on Andy's Motorcycle Obsessions, we're going to do a carburetor tune-up. Well, g'day everybody and welcome back. I've put about 4,000 kilometres or more on this engine since I put the Wiseco forged big bore kit and the performance cylinder head on it. I'm working towards getting it back onto a dynamometer so we can look at our needle and jet sizes and needle position. But one thing I haven't even looked at is the carburetor tuning. So I'm just going to run through that now with the flat slides and make sure that our idle circuit is right and that the carbs are all synchronised. Okay, so I'm a member of quite a lot of vintage classic motorcycle groups on social media, and one of the main thing that people get have questions about or run into difficulty with is carburetors. Now, when we're tuning carburetors, we don't have a lot of influence. We've got basically two things we can play with externally on the carburetor. One of them is the idle mixture or air fuel ratio on the idle circuit, and the other one is carburetor synchronization or balancing. Balancing, let's get down to the nut cutting. Balancing, all that is synchronizing the amount of air that is flowing through the carburetor venturi into the cylinder so that the carburetors are delivering about the same amount of airflow at idle. If you've only got one carburetor on your bike, you don't need to walk into a mechanic and say, I want you to balance my carb, because that's just, I've heard it. I mean, we might laugh, but it's true that there's lots of guys out there that really don't understand it, and we shouldn't be giving them a hard time. And I've seen it on social media where people just unload on these poor blokes that are trying to learn and trying to save labour and want to they have the passion to work on a bike, but don't quite have the knowledge and the skills. And it's up to the people that do to help them through that. So we've got multiple circuits in our carburetor. That's how it copes with the engine's demand for increasing amounts of fuel through the throttle range. And there's charts available out there that can show you the influence. In fact, I'll pop one up now for you to have a quick look at. So you've got an idle circuit, you've got a pilot or primary circuit, you've got a needle circuit, and you've got a main circuit. And they all have different jets. And the only one that we can really play with externally without opening the carburetor up and changing the size of the jets or the profile of the needle or shifting the position of the needle or anything else is the idle circuit. Now, the idle circuit, in some cases, that decision's been taken away from you. Some manufacturers, once the idle circuit has been set to comply with whatever local environmental compliance that they need to, so they will tune the carburetor for emissions, then they plug it so you don't have a chance to play with it. Now, you can remove those plugs. It's a case of very gently drilling down through the aluminium cap and putting in an easy out type screw extractor and removing the thing so that you can access your pilot jets. Now, as time goes on and these bikes get old, there will come a time when you may need to do that and completely strip your carburetor and clean it. And if you live in a country that has a high amount of ethanol in your fuels, you're going to need to be doing it. And ethanol not only gums up ports and airways and everything else in your carburetor, it attacks rubber. So a lot of the people who are making aftermarket carburetor rebuild kits, a lot of early carburetors had a rubber tip on the float needle valve, float needle and seat, and they've now just gone for a plain brass one to get rid of that rubber because it gets attacked. Knowing what sort of carburetor adjustment is important, but it's not the end of the world. If you're having carburetor issues, chances are that you've got a blocked pilot jet. That's the most common problem with carburetors, which means you need to pull the carburetor apart. It needs to be thoroughly cleaned, and I mean every port, every orifice. And there's some sneaky ones that hide in carburetors. They all need to be cleaned. Then the carburetor needs to go back together as per the factory settings. And then you can make some adjustment on your idle circuit. Now, depending on whereabouts that valve is positioned on the carburetor will determine whether or not you're influencing the air side of that air fuel mix or the fuel side of the air fuel mix. Generally, rule of thumb, let's just say that's your carburetor and the air cleaner side is over here and the air is flowing through. You have a venturi in the middle that accelerates the air as it passes through, and that causes a pressure differential and it draws fuel up from a fuel bowl. If your idle air mixture screw is on the engine side of the centre of the carburetor, if it's on that side, generally you're influencing the fuel circuit. If it's on this side, generally you're influencing the air circuit. And they're usually a different profile too. You can pull them out and have a look. Normally the fuel ones have a much finer needle, whereas the air ones tend to be more blunt, like that, the profile of the screw. Don't get caught up in that because sometimes these can snap off and they look like an air screw. But yeah, so generally the air fuel mixture screw is on that side and the fuel side is on that side. Once you're satisfied that your carburetor is clean, that your float level is correct, set as per the factory, and that is critical, then you can adjust your idle circuit. Now the best way to start is, look, just rule of thumb, wind the screw down until it bottoms out, and you don't want to put any pressure on it, you just want to feel it just touch down. Then you can then back it off about 1.5 turns and your bike should run. And from there you can make an adjustment. Now what you want to do is wind it in until you start to feel the engine revs drop down, and then you can reverse it and back it back off until you feel the idle. You'll hear the idle note come up to a peak, and then it doesn't matter how far you screw it past that, it doesn't change the idle. So let's just say, for example, you've closed your fuel air mixture screw here. You've wound it down, and you can feel you're nearly stalling the bike. Then you want to back that off. You'll hear the engine revs come up. When they stop coming up, that's where you want to set it at. Now, if you have to wind that screw more than 3 turns out, or 3.5 turns out, the pilot jet down in the fuel bowl, the primary jet, is too small or is blocked. These things have a spring on them, and that spring holds it in position so that it shouldn't rattle undone. So once you've got that set, that's your idle circuit. Now that can be very difficult to determine on multi-cylinder engines because it's not always easy to hear that change of engine note. If you're a trained mechanic and you do this all the time, you're going to have that. But generally, most of us won't do that. That's why I use the colour tune. The colour tune allows you to physically see what's happening inside the cylinder. You can see the colour of the flame, and you can easily adjust your pilot screw to bring that flame into the right amount of air-fuel ratio. I did a video on the colour tune, and if you want to have a look up in the corner at the carb that has just popped out, you can click on that and that'll take you through to that video. Now, carburetor synchronisation, carb balancing, what is that all about? If you've only got one carburetor, you don't need to have it balanced because it is the only one that's running that engine. Even if it's one carburetor feeding more than one cylinder, you don't need to have it balanced because it is on its own. Balancing is making sure that all of the carburetors are flowing the same amount of air through them at idle, so that they all are delivering an even amount of air, and you don't have one cylinder running more rich or more lean than any of the others. So depending on what type of carburetor you've got, if you've got one with butterflies in it, that butterfly shaft will all be tied together. Let's just say we've got two carburetors sitting side by side. They'll be joined by some sort of shaft for the butterflies, and that'll have some sort of an adjustment on it that allows you to, let's just say this one's open slightly more than that one. It'll allow you to adjust it so that they're both at the same level. And the way that we know that they're right, we can measure the low pressure that is generated by the cylinder in the manifold, and that'll tell us whether or not we're flowing. So whether those butterflies open or close more than the other, or whether or not, if it doesn't have butterflies, if it's just acting on the slides, whether or not those slides are all even and giving the same amount of air fuel. Now you can sync them on the bench, and I've done that, and again there's a video about that up in the corner. But that'll get them in the ballpark, but it doesn't account for engine conditions. You might have a cylinder that is slightly more worn than another, or you might have a bit more of air leak on your butterfly shaft or something like that that can influence it. So you still need to be able to hook up either a set of manual gauges or the vertical liquid filled type and get them all even. Now it has to be said that the bike's running fine. I just want to be sure. So the first thing I'm doing, I've plugged the colour tune into cylinder 1. I'm just going to go through each of the cylinders and just have a look at the idle circuit first. Then I'll balance the carbs, and then once the carburetors have been balanced, I'll go back and readjust the idle circuit. So we've got a nice bunch of blue in there now. That's the end of that one. So I'll just swap the colour tune unit now over to plug number 2. It is backfiring through the carburetor a little bit because, I'll be honest, these colour tunes aren't exactly a spark plug. Really is as easy as that, these bloody things. I know they polarise people a bit, but I'm a fan. I want to show you my new carburetor synchronizer. Now, it's not brand new. I bought this second hand on eBay. When I saw it up there, I was the only person bidding on it. I did a bit of research on them, and I found their shop online, but I don't know whether it was just coincidence. I hope it was. But at the time, the online shop was closed. I couldn't find another one for sale anywhere, and I couldn't find a price. So I put a bid in and I won it. Turns out I paid exactly what I could have paid for a brand new one. So lesson learned there. But these are cheap compared to a manometer gauges, which really are, they'll get you in the ballpark. But this is a highly refined peaking vacuum reading gauge. Battery's gone flat in the DSLR, so we're back to the GoPro. So what's all this peaking manometer malarkey? If you could graph what's happening inside the manifold during the engine cycle, it would start from zero and peak very quickly during the intake stroke. This is the low pressure, or I hate using the word, but the vacuum that's generated in the manifold, and then it falls away like so. And then it peaks again, and then falls away like so, and so on. Now, this area here is the intake stroke, and all the rest of it is the other 3 strokes in the cycle, and then the intake stroke again. Now, because of the way that gauges work, mechanical gauges work, you'll see them bounce and bounce and bounce, and then you need to dial them in so that they level out. And what you end up with is an average vacuum across there. The peaking manometer gauges, like the electronic one that I've got, are measuring this distance here, and they actually end up averaging out around about there somewhere. So they're far more indicative of the actual intake stroke rather than an average across all 4 strokes. That makes them a lot more accurate in terms of trying to get them, your carburetors dialed in. So all we do is we turn this on. You can buy these in 6 and with magnetic back on them as well. So it's calibrating the sensors at the moment. The median value is 26, and you can see each of them now has 26. It also uses one of the cylinder RPM to calculate, or every time it pulses on the intake stroke, it calculates your RPM as well. So I've got all the hoses connected. I'm going to go through one day and number these, but essentially they're just a quarter turn, and they're on. That's number 1. I'll call that one number 2. That one's number 3. And this one's number 4. Alright. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And all I need to do now is start the engine up and have a look at where we're at. I'll try and position the camera so you can get a decent look. But essentially, this is where our adjustment is. Number 3 carburetor is the master carburetor. It doesn't have any adjustment, so we've got to make all of the others exactly the same as number 3. This is going to be a bit tricky, but here we go. Let's start her up. Let it settle down. So number 3 is sitting at around about the 200 mark. Number 1 is a lot lower, which means it's running quite a bit faster. The others aren't too far off the mark, but we'll have a bit of a play anyway. Now, of course, as you move them, the others move as well, including number 3. I tell you now, these flat slides are really super sensitive things. But I can also say that it's really only number 1 that's out horrendously, and even it's come in pretty good now. I'm just going to lift the idle up a little bit. About where Yamaha kind of recommends it, about 1100. Tell you what, that's all pretty close. a pain in the arse to tune. So they're now all 197, 196, somewhere around that. So I'm pretty happy there. These really are hard to tune. Combine that with the fact that this is hyper accurate, we've gone an extra decimal point to what you would on any other gauge. Idle's about right. No lag off. Looking good, looking good. Looking good. So all that little exercise taught me was that the bloody carburetors were pretty good. I didn't need to tune much. Just a little bit of a tweak on number one on the synchronisation. But other than that, pretty bloody happy. So I'll just put all this back together now, and she's right to go for the dyno run when I get around to doing it. I'm sure there'll be a few people wanting to see how much horsepower we've gained. Alright, so there we are, running like a top and all safely tucked up now in the garage. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and comment, and we'll be back with more from Andy's Motorcycle Obsessions. Bye for now.